Since I moved to the Netherlands 14 months ago, I've made quite a few videos outlining some of the cultural differences and the ensuing cultural shocks that I've experienced from said cultural differences. But if I'm going to be completely honest with you, moving to a different country or a different continent actually hasn't been that difficult for me. Moving to the Netherlands from the US has been pretty easy, in fact. And I think that's in large part because, well, I moved from one developed nation to another. So either way, my life was going to be relatively good compared to the rest of the world's population. That said, there is one element of this transition that I definitely underestimated the difficulty of. And that has been integrating into a new family. You see, I grew up with my parents, my sister, and we were basically the family unit. I also had great relationships with some of my extended family, but I never really stayed with any of them for longer than a week, 2 weeks at most. So I didn't really know the full extent of what it meant to transition into a new family until I moved here. And suddenly I was thrust into this whole new family dynamic that I knew little to nothing about. And look, I just want to preface this video by saying that obviously my experience, so my familial experience growing up and my experience with Dutch families since I've arrived here could be exceptions rather than rules. They could be the exceptions to the rule, but I'm just working with the reference points that I have. Bearing that in mind, in this video, I want to talk about some of the differences that I've observed between American families and Dutch families. And really, everything that I divulge throughout this video, all of these differences come down to one underlying difference, which is that Dutch families tend to operate on a principle of collectivism, whereas American families tend to operate on a principle of individualism. And again, there are exceptions to this rule, or maybe I am the exception to this rule. All I know is that this has been a very jarring experience, which has bred substantial culture shock on my behalf. Now, the first way that this difference in Dutch family dynamics and American family dynamics presents itself is in scheduling. What do I mean by scheduling? Well, basically, back home, growing up, and again, my family might be unique, we might be the exception, I don't know. But growing up, everyone sort of operated on their own schedule. So as far as when we all went to sleep, when we all woke up, when we would all eat, things of that nature, we all just sort of did our own thing. And it was never really an issue. There was never even a conversation to be had about that. It wasn't uncommon for my mom to maybe wake up at 5 or 6 a.m. for work. My dad and I to wake up at around, let's call it noon or 1 p.m. because we both work from home. And then I guess by the time I started working from home, my sister was already out of the house. But even growing up, my sister was on her own schedule as well. She'd go out with her friends, things of that nature. Because, I mean, she was a teenage girl. That's what teenage girls do. But here, I've noticed that there is this expectation that everyone sort of operates on the same, or at the very least, a very similar schedule as a family unit. And I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a stark contrast to what I'm accustomed to experiencing. I've noticed that here, everyone kind of sleeps around the same time and wakes up around the same time, maybe within an hour of each other. Everyone kind of eats around the same time. And again, that's not something that I'm used to. And it's not even the fact that they do it, it's the fact that the expectation is present. The expectation is that you as a member of the family, even if you're not necessarily a member of the family by blood, but just by circumstance, the expectation is that you kind of adhere to that schedule. And again, that's something that, I'm going to be honest with you, it was very difficult for me to grasp, because again, I'm an individualist, as is everyone else in my family, and we just kind of do our own things. We do our own things. I don't even wake up and sleep at the same time every day. So to kind of alter my schedule to fit everyone else, again, that was a big adjustment for me. And I'm gonna be honest, it's something that I wasn't fully able to incorporate into my psyche. Maybe with enough time, it could have happened, but it just wasn't really something that was working out very well for me personally, which kind of played a role in my girlfriend and I abruptly deciding to move across the country. But I digress. I'm not even going to go into that, because that's a whole different can of worms that we don't need to open today. The next element of this collectivist mentality that Dutch families seem to operate with is meal times. So you heard me say earlier that Dutch families that is, tend to sort of eat around the same time. And consequently, what this means is that they also tend to have meals together. They tend to have this family dinner, family lunch, family breakfast, so on and so forth. That is not something that I really ever did growing up personally. Again, we all operated at our own schedules. So I would say most days I'd probably be out with my friends until 10 or 11 p.m. Then I would come home, I would eat dinner, and it was just normal to me. I never really thought twice about these things until I came here and realized that, oh, people eat dinner at 5 p.m. and that's sort of the expectation, is that you adhere to that. And again, maybe it's just me sort of being a rugged individualist, whatever you want to call me, I don't know. But that's something that it was very difficult for me to sort of adapt to. And truthfully, I kind of failed to adapt to that expectation, because I don't know, I just don't like to have that kind of system in place for myself. I sort of like to eat whenever I want to eat. But again, that's just the expectation that's present. And again, I'm not saying that this is worse or better. Obviously, it didn't really work very well for me, but clearly it works very well for the 18 million inhabitants of this country. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Americans also adhere to this particular principle of sharing those meal times together. I know that in the sitcoms and TV shows, movies, stuff like that, I would see the scenes where people would do it, but I never knew people actually did it in real life. Because my family, we never really did that. That was more of a special occasion sort of thing. And even when we would do that on occasion, let's say for example on Thanksgiving or Christmas, we still wouldn't eat at the table. We wouldn't necessarily all eat at the same table. We would just kind of eat within the same space where we could have a conversation. But even then, we'd probably have a movie playing or something like that. I don't know. I can't really recall any instances growing up where we ate together as a family at the table. And I don't really feel like I missed out on anything because of that. Personally, I have a great relationship with all of my family members, but I digress. That definitely seems to be a very big difference between Dutch families and American families. And I think also this is in part because Dutch families tend to stay within the same locations. So you also heard me mention earlier that my sister had already moved out by the time I had started working from home, doing YouTube basically. Well, when I said she moved out, I didn't mean that she moved down the street or somewhere within the same city that we were in. No, my sister moved hours away. She moved from Dallas to Houston, which is probably about the same distance as, let's say, for example, Limburg to Groningen, something like that, basically across the whole entire Netherlands. And even that isn't that far of a distance by American standards in terms of moving away from your family. I think that this right here has been probably one of the biggest shocks for me just in observing Dutch family dynamics, is sort of this expectation that you stay within that geographical region. And actually, I read a comment some months back about this that provided a really insightful perspective. Basically, the person was saying that the reason why Americans are so much more open to the notion of just kind of up and moving to a very far away location from their families is because we all descended from people who did that. And so this ideology is passed down, even if just subconsciously, from generation to generation. The idea back home is that if there is a better opportunity, even if that opportunity is just happiness waiting for you somewhere, then that's where you need to go, even if you don't have any family or friends there. And I mean, I am a prime example of this. I up and moved to a country that I had never even visited before. In the Netherlands, this seems to be a very abnormal thing. And I guess it is abnormal by American standards as well. But even your average American who goes to college is probably going to go to college in, if not another state, at least another city. That's kind of a stereotypical American trope, that the parents drive their kids up to the dorm and then they help them move in, and then they cry as they're driving away because they know they're probably not going to see their children for a few months. In my case, I mean, when my parents saw me off at the airport, I didn't know when I was going to see them again. I didn't know if it was going to be a few months, a few years, a decade. I didn't know. I had no idea. I just knew that I wanted to be in the Netherlands and that's where I was going to go. And here, again, my reference point is very limited, and I don't want to put anybody's business out there like that, but I don't think this is too intimate to reveal. But basically, when my girlfriend moved from the Netherlands to Valencia, Spain, she told me that her parents cried. Both of them cried at the airport watching her walk off. And they knew she was going to be back after 5 months. They already knew she was coming back after just a few months, but they were still very emotional because it's not normal here. That's not the expectation. The expectation is that you sort of stay at least within the same country, but really it seems like the expectation is that you remain within the same province almost. I mean, looking back on my girlfriend's family's lineage, as far as I'm aware, they've all kind of remained within that geographical region of Brabant for as far back as they could recall, or for as far back as they could trace in their ancestry. I could be wrong about that, but that's just from what I recall, at least a few generations back. Whereas, I mean, my mom, her whole side of the family came from the Philippines to the US. And then my dad's side of the family, I mean, they're pretty much scattered all over, and Hurricane Katrina kind of played a big role in that. I'm kind of just rambling now, but I'm saying all of this to say that basically here in the Netherlands, it is not normal to leave your hometown. It's not normal. Or if you do, you're going from Sprangkapelle to Tilburg or something like that. You're not going from, let's say, for example, Vassen, where I'm currently walking right now, to Sweden or Finland or something like that. It's not really normal to do that. And I don't even think this is particularly Dutch. I think this is more of a European thing. And I think it goes right back to what that guy said in that comment, which is that American people all descend from people who have left their homeland basically in search of a future that was uncertain to them. And I think that's maybe why us Americans tend to be a little less risk averse than our European counterparts. But on the flip side of that, European people, the people who are here still, they descended from the people who chose to stay. And that ideology was passed down from generation to generation. So this has really been interesting for me to see, because again, my girlfriend's parents cried at the airport when they saw her off to go to Spain for 5 months. My parents, I mean, maybe they cried on the way back home, but I didn't see them shed a single tear at all. And I didn't shed a single tear either. My girlfriend, she also cried whenever she went to Valencia. That's a big part of the reason why I chose to go out there, was to bring her comfort, because she was entering this new, unfamiliar territory alone. And I wanted to be there for her as a boyfriend and as a friend. But I didn't really have that same emotional response, because it was always just expected. That was the expectation, was that, look, I'm going to leave. I'm not going to stay in Louisville, Texas my whole life. I'm not going to stay in Dallas, Fort Worth my whole life. I'm not even going to stay in Texas my whole life, or really even the US my whole life. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go far away somewhere, because there's this whole world out there and I want to see it. But I will say, the places that I have seen in the world, the Netherlands has to be right there near the top of them. So I can see why Dutch people wouldn't necessarily feel as inclined to just up and leave when the country is so good. It provides such a high quality of life. But I'm kind of rambling now. This isn't even about leaving the Netherlands or leaving America. This is more about the family dynamic. And again, I do feel like, because of this collectivist ideology that permeates Dutch people's psyches, especially in the context of family, if you make a move like the one that I did, I think that the response amongst your family members will probably be very different, very, very different than the response that I received from my family members, who, by the way, both did the same thing that I did. Not my sister, but my parents. They both made an international move on relatively short notice, just like I did. So again, it kind of runs in the family in that sense, but it really just runs in the culture to just do things like this. Not saying it's better or worse, but it's very different. And that's something that I have had to learn how to navigate, in terms of just being an emotional anchor for my girlfriend, even in just moving from the area we were in Brabant to Gelderland. Because, I mean, it hit her very hard emotionally to not be near her family. But in my head, I'm like, you are near your family. You're only, what, an hour or two away. But to her, it's different. It's different because she probably never really expected to do this kind of thing growing up, because the expectation wasn't planted in her head. Nobody really served as an example of that expectation. So it kind of just came out of left field for everyone except for me.